Remove the passenger. 3 words from the air marshal, and the whole gate went silent. They pulled her out of line like a criminal. Hands shaking. Voice breaking. She kept saying the same thing over and over. Nobody listened. 40 minutes later, that same airplane, 291 people on board, was falling out of the sky. And the only person on Earth who knew exactly how to save it, was standing in a terminal. Still wearing her boarding pass like a wound that wouldn't close. Before you continue, drop a comment with the city you're watching this from tonight. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Gate 47 at O'Hare International Airport smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air, the particular Tuesday morning fatigue of a terminal that had already processed 6 flights before 9 a.m. Pacific Crest Airlines Flight 902 to Tokyo Narita was scheduled to push back at 9:40, and the gate agents were moving through final boarding with the practiced, slightly glazed efficiency of people who had said, "Thank you. Enjoy your flight," so many times the words had stopped meaning anything. Maya Reyes stood near the back of the priority line, her boarding pass held loosely in one hand, a worn leather binder tucked under her other arm like she was afraid someone might take it from her. She was 34, unremarkable in the way airports are full of unremarkable people, gray cardigan, dark jeans, hair pulled back in a low knot that had started the day neat and was already losing the argument. Nothing about her drew the eye. That had once been the entire design of her life. To be exact, to be careful, to be the person in the room who noticed everything and was noticed by no one. It had cost her almost everything she had, and she had spent 6 years trying to forget that lesson. She had not entirely succeeded. She glanced up at the departure board the way she always did, an old reflex, checking tail numbers the way other people checked weather. Pacific Crest 902. Boeing 777-300ER. Registration N774PC. Her stomach dropped before her mind had finished processing why. She knew that number. She had typed it 100 times into a report 6 years ago, a report that had her name on it and had, eventually, cost her everything else. She told herself it was a coincidence. Aircraft got reassigned, repainted, recertified. 6 years was a long time. Components got replaced. Inspections happened. She had not seen that registration since the day she'd been escorted out of a glass office building in Everett, Washington, with a cardboard box and a severance check that felt like hush money because it was. She boarded anyway. What else was she going to do, not go to her sister's wedding because of a number on a screen? She found her seat, 34A, a window seat over the wing she had specifically requested, another old reflex she had never managed to break. She put her binder in the seat back pocket in front of her, the worn leather creased soft from years of handling, and she looked out at the engine cowling gleaming in the morning light, and she told herself, again, that it was a coincidence. Then she saw the access panel. It was nothing, really. A 2-inch seam along the lower pylon fairing, slightly proud of the surrounding skin, the kind of thing that 99 people in 100 would never register at all. But Maya had spent 4 years of her professional life studying exactly that seam on exactly that model of aircraft, on exactly that generation of pylon attachment fitting, and the misalignment she was looking at right now, from 20 feet away through a scratched double-pane window, matched a failure signature she had drawn by hand in a report that had been buried in a corporate filing cabinet for 6 years. Her hands started shaking before her mind caught up with why. She unbuckled. She stood. A flight attendant near the front, a young man with a name tag reading Derek, was midway through the safety briefing and gave her a polite, practiced look that said, "Please sit down, ma'am, we're about to push back." "I need to speak to someone about the aircraft," she said. Her voice came out lower than she wanted, urgent in a way that made the businessman in 34B glance up from his phone. "It's about the right engine pylon. There's an attachment fitting that needs to be inspected before this flight departs. I worked in structural engineering for." "Ma'am, please take your seat," Derek said, already moving toward her, the smile not quite reaching his eyes anymore. "We can address any concerns once we're." "I'm not trying to cause a problem," Maya said, and she heard how it sounded even as she said it, too fast, too intense, the words of someone who had spent 6 years rehearsing a warning nobody had wanted to hear the first time. I need someone with maintenance authority to look at frame station 1160 on the right pylon before this aircraft leaves the gate. I have documentation. I can show you exactly. She reached for her binder. That was the moment Daniel Cross, 2 rows back, sitting quietly in 33D in a sport coat that fit slightly too well to be casual, set down the paperback novel he had not actually been reading and watched a woman with wide, frightened eyes pull a thick folder of papers and photographs out of a bag and begin trying to hand them to a flight attendant while using the words, attachment fitting, and, before this aircraft leaves the gate, in the same sentence. Daniel Cross had 14 years with the Federal Air Marshal Service. He had flown more hours undercover than most pilots flew in uniform. He had learned, the hard way, twice, that the people who caused the worst moments of his career rarely looked the way movies told you they would look. They looked exactly like this. Calm dressed up as urgency. A story rehearsed so many times it came out smooth and technical and almost convincing. A folder of documentation handed over at the exact moment that would create the most confusion and the least scrutiny. He stood. "Ma'am, I need you to sit down and keep your hands where I can see them." Maya turned, and something in her face folded inward, not guilt, though it would look that way to everyone watching, but a particular, specific exhaustion, the exhaustion of a person who has tried to say a true thing in a public place one too many times and watched it get heard as something else entirely. I'm a structural engineer, I used to work for. Sit down. She sat down. Her hands were trembling now, visibly, and the businessman in 34B had already pulled out his phone, and the woman across the aisle was staring with the particular wide-eyed stillness of someone deciding whether to be afraid. Cross had his credentials out before he reached her row, holding them low, professional, calm in the specific way that was meant to project calm onto everyone around him while internally his mind was already running through the protocol he had rehearsed 1,000 times and hoped to never use. Unusual behavior. Technical language designed to sound authoritative. An attempt to physically hand materials to a crew member during final boarding. A request specifically and repeatedly to delay or alter the departure of the aircraft. It read, on every metric he had been trained to watch for, like the opening moves of exactly the kind of incident his entire career existed to prevent. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Maya Reyes." "Please, I'm not, I used to work on this exact aircraft type. I have a federal whistleblower case on file with the NTSB from 2018, you can verify. You're going to need to come with me. The plane needs to be inspected before." "Ma'am." His voice did not rise. It did the opposite, it dropped, flattened, became the voice trained specifically to communicate that the conversation had already ended even though words were still being exchanged. "You can explain everything to ground security. Right now you're going to stand up slowly and come with me." What happened next took 90 seconds and felt, to Maya, like it lasted the length of her entire adult life. Derek radioed the gate agent. The gate agent radioed the lead flight attendant. 2 more crew members appeared from the forward galley with the particular brisk, overcorrect courtesy that airline staff deploy specifically to manage an unfolding incident without using the word incident out loud. Cross took Maya by the upper arm, not roughly, but with the unmistakable, immovable pressure of a man who had done this before and intended to do it correctly, and walked her up the aisle past 290 other passengers, every one of whom turned to look. She did not scream. She did not fight him. That was, in its own way, the most painful part to watch, the businessman in 34B would say later, when reporters started calling. She just kept saying the same thing, over and over, quietly, like a woman repeating a prayer she no longer expected anyone to answer. "Please. The right pylon. Frame station 1160. Please, just have someone look at it before you push back. Please." Nobody looked at the pylon. By the time they reached the jet bridge, Maya Reyes had stopped talking. She walked with her head down, her binder still clutched against her chest because no one had thought to take it from her, tears running silently down her face in the specific, controlled way of someone who has cried like this before and has learned, somewhere along the way, how to do it without making a sound. A teenager near the door had her phone up, recording. Somewhere behind her, she heard someone mutter the word unstable, and somewhere else, someone else laughed, not unkindly, just nervously, the way people laugh at things they don't understand and would rather not think about. The gate agent took her boarding pass at the door of the jet bridge and didn't meet her eyes when she did it. "I'm sorry, ma'am. For your safety and the safety of other passengers, you won't be permitted to board this flight." "Please," Maya said, one last time, so quietly that only Cross, standing beside her, actually heard it. "Please. Just look at the pylon." The jet bridge door closed behind her with a soft mechanical hiss that sounded, to her, exactly like the sound of being right and unheard for the second time in her life. Maya sat in a plastic chair in the security holding office at the far end of Terminal 5 for 40 minutes, her binder on her lap, her hands finally still because there was nothing left to shake about. 2 TSA officers had taken her statement, photographed her ID, run her name through a database that came back, predictably, with nothing, no flags, no record, no history of anything except one item that made the younger officer pause and glance at his colleague, a federal whistleblower retaliation complaint, filed 2018, closed without finding, against Cascade Aerostructures, a subcontractor for Pacific Crest's maintenance division. "You used to work for them," the officer said. It wasn't quite a question. "I used to inspect their work," Maya said. "There's a difference." She did not tell him the rest, because she had told it before, to people with more authority than a gate area security officer, and it had not mattered then either. 6 years ago she had been one of 4 senior structural inspectors assigned to a fleet-wide audit of pylon attachment fittings on a batch of newly delivered 777s, an audit triggered by an unrelated incident at another carrier that had everyone in the industry quietly checking their own fleets without admitting publicly that they were worried. Maya had found something the other 3 inspectors hadn't, a manufacturing tolerance issue in a specific lot of titanium fittings that, under repeated thermal cycling, developed a fatigue crack pattern invisible to standard visual inspection and detectable only with a specific ultrasonic technique she had begun using on her own initiative because the existing protocol, in her professional opinion, wasn't sensitive enough. She had written it up. She had flagged 6 aircraft by tail number. N774PC had been one of them. Grounding 6 wide-body aircraft mid-fleet, even briefly, even for inspection, would have cost the airline an amount of money that made the people above her uncomfortable in a way her data did not. She had been told, in a meeting she remembered with a clarity that still made her hands cold, that her findings were inconclusive, and that the existing inspection interval was conservative enough. She had pushed. She had gone over her supervisor's head. 3 months later she had been let go in a restructuring that eliminated exactly one position, hers. She had filed a complaint. The complaint had gone nowhere, the way most things like it go nowhere, buried under the specific, patient weight of an industry that has more lawyers than the people trying to hold it accountable. She had spent 4 years afterward doing structural consulting for smaller operators, the kind of work that didn't require anyone's permission, and the other 2 years after that simply trying to stop checking tail numbers on departure boards, a habit she had never quite managed to break, the way some people never stop checking that the stove is off. And today, of all days, on her way to her sister's wedding, the habit had been right. She didn't know yet how right. At 10:22 a.m., the overhead monitors in the security office, tuned permanently to a cable news channel with the sound muted, cut to a banner that made the younger TSA officer sit up straight and reach for the remote. Breaking, Pacific Crest Flight 902 declares emergency over Lake Michigan, returning to O'Hare. Maya's binder slid off her lap and hit the floor with a sound that seemed very far away. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. "Turn that up. Turn that up, please." The anchor's voice filled the small room, calm in the specific over-rehearsed way of someone reading words off a teleprompter that had been handed to her 4 minutes ago. Reports of severe vibration and a possible structural issue with the right engine approximately 40 minutes after departure, Air Traffic Control has cleared all approaches into O'Hare, 291 passengers and crew on board. It's the pylon, Maya said, to no one, to everyone, her voice cracking on the second word. It's the right pylon. I told them. I told them before they pushed back. The older TSA officer looked at her with an expression that had changed completely in the space of 10 seconds, not suspicion now, but something closer to dawning horror. You said you used to inspect this exact aircraft. I need to talk to someone in air traffic control. Now. Please. I know exactly what's failing up there and I know exactly what they need to do about it, and if nobody tells the pilots in the next few minutes, that aircraft is not going to make it back. Daniel Cross was standing in the operations corridor behind the gate when the alert came through his radio, the specific tight, clipped cadence of a controlled emergency broadcast that every law enforcement officer in the building had been trained to recognize instantly. He had not boarded Flight 902. His assignment had ended at the gate, a routine security escort, paperwork to file, a flight to catch 6 hours later on a different route entirely. He had watched the aircraft push back from the lounge window with the specific, satisfied feeling of a job correctly done, a potential threat identified, removed, and the flight allowed to depart safely. He felt that satisfaction curdle into something cold and sick in his stomach within 4 seconds of hearing the word emergency over the radio. He did not consciously decide to run. His body simply started moving, down the corridor, past startled gate agents, toward the security office at the end of Terminal 5, because some part of his mind, the part that had been trained for 14 years to notice patterns and had, this one time, gotten the pattern catastrophically wrong, was already putting together a sentence he did not want to be true. Frame Station 1160. Please, just have someone look at it. He had heard her say it 11 times in the space of 2 minutes and had categorized every single repetition as the behavior of someone trying to manufacture a delay. He had not, for 1 second, considered that she might simply be a person telling the truth to people who had decided in advance not to listen. He reached the security office out of breath, his sport coat half off one shoulder, and found Maya Reyes standing in the middle of the small room with a TSA officer's desk phone pressed to her ear, her voice steady now in a way it had not been steady an hour earlier, the particular calm of someone who has stopped being afraid of being disbelieved because there is no longer time for that fear. Yes, I understand it's not standard protocol, I am asking you to patch me through to airport operations regardless. This is Maya Reyes, I am a former senior structural inspector with direct knowledge of a documented fatigue failure mode in the exact pylon attachment fitting currently failing on that aircraft. And every minute you spend verifying my credentials is a minute those pilots don't have. Cross crossed the room in 4 steps and did something he had never once done to a civilian witness in 14 years of service. He got down on one knee in front of her chair so that his eyes were level with hers, and he said, quietly, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Tell me what you need and I will get it for you right now. Maya looked at him for one long second, long enough for him to understand exactly how much that look cost her, the specific weight of being asked to trust, immediately and completely, the exact authority that had dragged her off the aircraft an hour earlier, and then she said, without a trace of triumph in her voice, only urgency, I need a direct line to the tower, and I need someone who can patch me into communication with the cockpit of Flight 902, and I need it in the next 90 seconds. Or none of the rest of this is going to matter. Cross was already moving, his own radio in his hand. This is Marshal Cross, badge 4411. I have a civilian structural engineer with critical safety information for Flight 902. I need an emergency patch to tower frequency immediately, on my authority, I will take full responsibility, move. The cockpit of Flight 902 had been fighting a losing argument with physics for 31 minutes. Captain Renata Diaz had 19 years and 11,000 hours, and in all of them she had never felt an aircraft behave quite like this, a deep, grinding vibration in the right engine that had begun as a faint shudder somewhere over Lake Michigan and had grown, steadily, into something that made the entire airframe shake with a rhythm that felt less like turbulence and more like something tearing, slowly, on purpose. The right engine instruments showed thrust and temperature readings that didn't agree with each other. Hydraulic pressure on System 2 was dropping in a slow, uneven decline that made no sense against any failure mode in her training. The aircraft wanted, with a stubborn, mechanical insistence, to roll right, and First Officer Tom Whitfield had both hands locked on the controls, fighting a tendency that should not have existed at the power settings they were running. "I don't understand what I'm looking at," Whitfield said, for the third time, his voice tight. "This isn't a standard engine failure signature. It's like something structural is moving." "Because something structural might be moving," Diaz said, her own hand steady on the yoke through sheer force of will. "Edwards, sorry, O'Hare approach, this is Pacific Crest 902, we are showing continued severe vibration on the right side, control response is degraded, we are requesting immediate priority and we do not yet have a clear diagnosis of the failure." The response that came back was not the controller's voice she expected. "Pacific Crest 902, stand by, we have a structural engineer on a patched emergency line who states she has direct prior knowledge of this exact failure mode on this exact aircraft. Putting her through now." There was a half-second of silence in the cockpit that felt, to both pilots, considerably longer. Then a woman's voice, slightly breathless, urgent but controlled, filled their headsets. "Captain, my name is Maya Reyes. I'm a former structural inspector. 6 years ago I flagged this exact aircraft, tail number 774 PC, for a fatigue crack defect in the right pylon's forward attachment fitting, frame station 1160. That finding was never acted on. I believe that fitting has now failed partially, which is why you're seeing a vibration that doesn't match a standard engine failure and a roll tendency that's getting worse instead of stabilizing. Captain, the engine itself may not be damaged at all. The mount holding it to the wing is." Diaz's blood went cold in a way 30 years of flying had never quite prepared her for. It explained everything, the disagreement between thrust and vibration readings, the slow hydraulic decline as lines running through the pylon structure stretched and chafed against a fitting that was no longer rigid, the roll tendency that worsened the longer they ran the engine at any meaningful power. "Copy. Reyes, if you're right, what do I do? I cannot lose this engine at this altitude over the lake." "You're not going to lose the engine," Maya said. "You're going to lose the engine mount if you keep demanding power from it. Captain, I need you to reduce right engine thrust to the absolute minimum that still allows controlled flight, not idle, you still need it for control authority on approach, but as close to idle as you can manage without losing the ability to compensate for asymmetry. Every degree of additional thrust is additional vibration load on a fitting that is already partially separated. You are not flying an engine problem. You are flying a structural problem that happens to have an engine attached to it." "Reducing right thrust now," Diaz said, and Whitfield's hands moved with her, the two of them working the throttle back in careful increments, watching the vibration on the instrument panel ease, fractionally, almost immediately. The shudder running through the airframe did not disappear, but it changed, slower, heavier, less violent. "It's better," Whitfield said, disbelief and relief fighting for space in his voice. "God, it's actually better." "Captain, listen carefully," Maya said. "When you reduce power on that side, the aircraft is going to want to yaw and roll left from the asymmetric thrust, which is the opposite problem you've been fighting for the last half hour. Don't try to correct it all with aileron. Use rudder trim primarily, hold a small amount of bank into the dead, into the low power side, and let the bank angle do some of the work the ailerons would normally do. You are essentially flying with one engine now in everything but name. Fly it that way." "Copy, flying it that way." "Your hydraulic system too is going to continue to degrade slowly as long as that engine keeps vibrating at all, even at reduced power, because the lines run directly through that pylon structure. You need to plan your approach assuming you may lose System 2 entirely before you're on the ground. Do you have a checklist for asymmetric hydraulic approach with reduced flap capability?" "We do." "Brief it now, and brief your first officer on manual reversion procedures for the flight controls on that side, because I don't think you're going to need them, but if that fitting separates completely during the approach, and Captain, I have to tell you honestly, that is a real possibility, you need every second of advance preparation you can get. Do not deploy full flaps until you've confirmed symmetrical extension. Do it in small increments, the way you would for a hydraulic compromised landing, and stop immediately if you see any asymmetry develop. In the tower side operations room, Daniel Cross stood with his hand pressed flat against the wall, watching Maya Reyes through the open office doorway as she spoke, not shouting, not performing, simply delivering, in a clear and unhurried voice, the exact knowledge that the moment 6 years ago had told her did not matter to anyone. Her hands had stopped shaking entirely. Her eyes were fixed on nothing, the particular stillness of someone whose entire attention had narrowed down to a single, solvable problem and the people depending on her to solve it. He thought, watching her, that he had never in his career been more wrong about a person, and he understood, with a clarity that made his chest ache, that he was about to watch that same person save the lives of everyone he had been sworn to protect, using the exact information he had personally prevented anyone from hearing 40 minutes earlier. The descent into O'Hare took 19 minutes, every one of them narrated quietly between Maya Reyes and a flight deck 291 souls were depending on without knowing her name. She walked Captain Diaz through the reduced thrust approach profile, through the staged flap deployment, through the specific rudder and aileron blend that would keep the aircraft flying straight on an engine that was, by every reasonable measure, no longer fully attached to the wing that carried it. Fire and rescue lined runway 28 are in the long red and white formation that meant every controller and every emergency crew at O'Hare had cleared their schedule for this single aircraft. The right engine's vibration held steady at the reduced power setting, ugly but survivable, a grinding mechanical heartbeat that Diaz could feel through the soles of her boots the entire way down. 500 feet, Whitfield called, his voice tight with concentration. Speed's good. We're holding the bank angle. Reyes, are you still with us? I'm here, Maya said. You're doing exactly what you need to be doing. Don't fight the bank. Let it land you a little crooked. Crooked and on the ground beat straight and short of the runway. The 777 came down out of a sky gone hazy with October light, the right engine trailing a thin ribbon of vapor that wasn't smoke, listing very slightly to the left in a configuration that looked, to everyone watching from the ground, deeply wrong and somehow, impossibly, controlled. The main gear touched concrete hard, once, the whole airframe shuddering with the impact and with something else, something structural, finally giving way in the second after the wheels found the runway rather than the second before. The aircraft rolled out, slowing under heavy braking, fire trucks already running alongside, foam units moving into position as a precaution that, in the end, nobody needed. It came to a stop with 11,000 feet of runway still ahead of it. In the cockpit, Captain Diaz sat for 3 full seconds with both hands still on a yoke she no longer needed to hold, before she keyed the radio one last time, her voice unsteady for the first time in 31 minutes. Tower, 902 is down, all stop, all souls accounted for. A pause. Reyes, whoever you are, wherever you are, you just saved this airplane. Every person on it owes you their life, and most of them are never going to know your name. I will make sure that's not true. It took 11 days for the full picture to assemble itself. The original 2018 inspection report, recovered from an archived server Cascade Aerostructures had never quite managed to delete, matching exactly the failure that had nearly brought down Flight 902, the National Transportation Safety Board reopening Maya's 6-year-old retaliation complaint, this time with an actual incident attached to it instead of a hypothetical one, Pacific Crest Airlines grounding the 4 remaining aircraft from that production lot within 48 hours, the inspection nobody had wanted to pay for in 2018 finally happening at a cost that made the earlier refusal look, in hindsight, like the most expensive decision in the company's history. Daniel Cross gave a statement to investigators that did not minimize his own role in what had happened at the gate, a fact that surprised the NTSB interviewer enough that she said so out loud. He found Maya 3 weeks later, not at an airport this time, but at a small reception hall in Tokyo where her sister's wedding, delayed 11 days, rebooked, finally happened under string lights and the particular forgiving warmth of a celebration that almost didn't get to occur. He did not call ahead. He simply appeared at the edge of the room in a suit that fit him slightly too well, and when Maya saw him, something in her face that had been braced for 6 years, and especially for the last 3 weeks, finally, visibly, let go. "I read the full transcript," he said. "Everything you said to those pilots. I want you to know I've requested this footage be used in Air Marshal training, with your permission. Not as an example of a threat we caught. As an example of one we almost created, ourselves, out of nothing but our own certainty." Maya looked at him for a long moment, the way she had looked at him in that security office, except now there was nothing left in the look that needed forgiving, only something tired and a little disbelieving and, underneath all of it, finally, something like peace. "You can use it," she said. "On one condition." "Anything." "Tell them the lesson isn't about me. It's that the person trying hardest to be believed is sometimes the only one in the room who's right, and the only way to find out is to actually listen before you decide." 6 months later, the NTSB's final report on the incident included, in its closing recommendations, a passage that the agency's public affairs office would later confirm had been written, almost word for word, the way Maya had asked it to be written. It noted that the intervention of passenger Maya Reyes had prevented what investigators determined would, without question, have been a catastrophic structural failure during cruise flight. It noted that her original 2018 findings had been technically sound and improperly dismissed. And it closed with a single sentence that aviation safety boards rarely include in official documents, but that this one did, because somewhere in the room where it was drafted, someone had decided the moment deserved it. Expertise does not announce itself by appearance, and the cost of refusing to listen is measured, ultimately, not in inconvenience, but in lives. Maya kept a framed copy of that page on the wall of the small consulting office she opened 8 months later. Reyes Structural Integrity Group, 3 employees, 1 mission, every contract built around a single non-negotiable principle, every concern gets investigated, regardless of who raises it or how urgently they raise it. She still checks tail numbers on departure boards out of habit. She has never once been wrong to